So for this one, we'll talk about Wild Bill Clinton. So in '92, the Democrats chose Clinton to run for president. Now Clinton had a lot of allegations with sexual harassment, a variety of, he was the first presidential candidate to admit smoking pot. There were allegations of draft evasion. That's a maybe, that's a maybe not. The sexual harassment and the pot use is 100% accurate. The draft evasion is a maybe. There was a Whitewater thing that the conspiracy goes, he killed how many people? Do you remember when you did your thing? Like 100 and so, 100, just a ridiculous amount of people that he supposedly murdered. Probably not, but whatever. And then Al Gore. So you got the guy who smokes pot and sexually harasses women, and then you got the most boring man in the world as his running mate. There's the, I'm guessing the guy on the left is the pot smoking Bill. Just taking a shot. Okay, the one thing that Bill Clinton did differently from other Democratic presidents or other Democratic candidates was typically when you have a Democratic president or a candidate, they like talk about the defense spending budget and they're not very strong on anti-crime. He went full go. We're gonna spend money. We're gonna stop crime, and we're gonna stimulate the economy. So realistically, when we started talking about this, and we had the rise in conservatism that started with Ronald Reagan, he realistically is pretty much a Republican president. Like a lot of the things that he gets credit for was a continuation of some of the things that he already started, or that like Reagan and Bush had already started. He just kind of expanded and finished them. He had some other policies that were not Republican whatsoever, but he's kind of a continuation. He was a very conservative Democratic president. George Bush was hurt by the fact that he was going to tax them, or said no new taxes, and then raise taxes. And he was trying to run on the family values and Christian conservatism that Ronald Reagan won on, but he couldn't quite pull it off as well as Reagan. Then we entered this guy. So that guy's name is Ross Perot. And Ross Perot was an interesting cat. He was a Texas billionaire. He ran for president. He got almost 20 million votes. And realistically, he probably cost Bush the election. He took enough votes and enough swing states away from Bush and gave them to Clinton, even though he didn't win the states. He just took the votes away from Bush that actually probably gave Clinton the election. There's what your map looked like. Clinton won 370 to 168. The other thing that happened in this election is Democrats also won control of both houses of Congress. So you had a new president with control of the Senate and the House. It's a little loud. So, Bill Clinton, fun fact about Clinton, he plays both the tenor and the soprano sax. He went on Arsenio Hall. I don't know if any of you know who Arsenio Hall is, but he had a talk show. He went on Arsenio Hall, played the saxophone, everybody thought he was cool. So, some of the things that Bill Clinton did in his presidency. The U.S. military had a policy called Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy was you could be a homosexual in the military as long as you didn't come out. So So you were allowed, like before, you weren't allowed. Now you could be in the military as long as you didn't come out, and nobody in the chain of command would ask you about your sexual orientation. That's what don't ask, don't tell is. Bill appointed Hillary to revamp the nation's healthcare system. So Hillary went through about 3 or 4 years and tried to revamp how healthcare was going. Never passed. One of the issues that she ran into was by the time she brought her plan forward, the House had switched from Democrat to Republican, and that was pretty much that. Realistically, it's very similar to Obamacare that passed 14, 15 years later. Clinton passed a gun control bill called the Brady Bill. We've talked about Reagan, attempt on Reagan's life. James Brady was shot at the same time Reagan was shot. He was paralyzed. They named it after him. Of course, anytime you pass a gun control regulation, the NRA is going to start attacking you, so the NRA started to attack him. So 2 years into Clinton's presidency, the control of the House switched over to Republican, led by that man right there, Newt Gingrich. Newt had a very specific plan. His plan was say no to everything. Didn't matter if it was good, didn't matter if it helped people. If Bill Clinton suggested it, no. But it's going to do this and this and this, no. He wanted to make sure that Clinton's presidency was a failure. So after the first 2 years of Clinton's presidency, not very much happened, honestly. Clinton passed a $30 billion anti-crime bill. That's had some positives and some negatives. After the passing of the bill, crimes and murder rates have fallen ever since. It's also one of the main reasons why the Black Lives Matter protest happened, why there's so much call for law enforcement reform, because the bill and the way it hands out punishments and the way it incarcerates people is kind of slanted to be anti-African American, honestly. So you had crimes that would be a misdemeanor before, now they became, you got locked in jail for 20 years. It made the punishments much more harsh than they previously were. And it loosened the enforcement of the laws, which it turned into police forces being a little bit more aggressive with their enforcement tactics, I guess is the most appropriate way to put it. Clinton signed NAFTA. You might have heard of NAFTA when Donald Trump was president. Trump called NAFTA the worst trade agreement ever signed. NAFTA was between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. It opened up the borders, it dropped tariffs, and it promoted free trade. NAFTA has something that has hurt the U.S. economically. There's been a handful of incidents that have been a negative impact. Farming has been negatively impacted in some capacities. The thing with NAFTA is NAFTA was started by Reagan. So Reagan and Canada signed an agreement. It was furthered by Bush, and Bush had got about 90% of the groundwork laid. and then Clinton just came in and kind of put his name on it and passed it. But a lot of the stuff had been already put in place, even though at the time it passed, it was a revolutionary thing. And so Clinton took all the credit for it, and now he takes all the blame for it. World Trade Organization started. Much like NAFTA, lowering trade boundaries, it did the same thing worldwide. A couple of terrorist attacks happened under Clinton. In 1993, the World Trade Center was bombed by Osama bin Laden. They drove a car into the underground parking lot and it blew up, killed 6 people. They were hoping it would do more damage, but it only killed 6. I guess only, maybe that's not the right choice, but they rebuilt the World Trade Center and then Osama took another shot at it. This guy right here, Timothy McVeigh, took a delivery truck, loaded it with fertilizer, parked it in front of the Oklahoma City courthouse, and blew it up. Killed 169 people. If you go to Oklahoma City today, there's a memorial there. You can see, again, took a big chunk of that building. The truck was parked there. You can see, like, it took and blew up half the building. Because Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton were constantly fighting, the government went through a bunch of shutdowns or came close to shutting down. There was a whole bunch of budget disagreements between Clinton and the Republicans in the House. So in '95, they have this disagreement. The American government gets shut down. And one thing Clinton did do was Clinton had considerably cut the federal deficit. Under Clinton's presidency, the United States was actually operating in the black. That means they were making more money than they were spending. It's the first time since Johnson, the United States was actually making more money than it was spending. Johnson started it by a whole bunch of social programs like Medicaid and Medicare and all these other things. Nixon, we talked about Nixon, he carried it on and added more things to it. Ford and Carter were getting close to balancing it, then the oil embargo, and that happened, so then it got larger. Reagan increased spending on missiles. Bush tried to raise taxes to cut into the deficit. Clinton was the first one to actually balance it and start making money for the United States for the first time in about 25 years. He's also the last president to ever balance the budget. '96, Clinton ran against Bob Dole. Bob Dole was easily defeated. Ross Perot ran again in '96. Didn't get, I think he got like 5 million votes. So he got hardly any votes the second time. He became kind of a joke. Saturday Night Live did a thing with, it was Ross Perot and Bob Dole, and Ross Perot and George Bush and Bill Clinton, and they did their impersonations. And, it's funny, but it kind of undercut Ross Perot's chances. So the second term of Clinton's administration, there wasn't as much stuff passed. There was a welfare reform bill that got passed that made it harder for people to get welfare and put in a better set of checks and balances before people could receive payments. He protected affirmative action, and the economy was doing really good, so he just kind of wrote out a second term. One of the things that farmers are dealing with today is there was a whole bunch of land set aside during Clinton's time that were preservation attempts. The Land and Water Usage Acts that got stricter during Clinton, so that's why draining a slough right now and putting drain tile in it and farming it is a bit of a hurdle, even though it's on your land and all that stuff. Part of the reason is because of these land preservation acts. There wasn't any significant super duper wars that happened during Clinton's time, but he did send people to a variety of different places. Northern Ireland, the Catholics and the Protestants were blowing each other up, so he sent people there to help control that. A guy by the name of Slobodan Milosevic started ethnically cleansing a whole bunch of people in Yugoslavia. So he sent some troops over there to help that. There's also some more ethnic cleansing going on in Somalia. So he sent some troops over there to help with that. And since we were the only world power after the end of the Cold War, and when anything like that sprung up, people looked to the United States to help bail them out or help keep the peace. The other thing that Clinton did was there was a meeting between Yitzhak Rabin, that's the guy on the left, and Yasser Arafat, that's the guy on the right. Israel and Palestine have fought a war since 1947. Since Jewish people were given land in Israel, they've been fighting a war since 1947. So Clinton worked out a peace accord between those two. Lasted for 2 years. Not real successful, but it's something. And that's it. Tomorrow we'll talk about Wild Bill getting impeached.